Um, Good evening, everybody. My name is John Palisano, and we are here for the LA BookFest panel called The Masters of the Macabre. We're going to have a great conversation tonight with three of my favorite people. I'm going to introduce everybody, and they're going to say a little bit about themselves. Man, I don't think it needs any introduction, but his name is Jonathan Maberry. He's the New York Times bestselling author, a 5-time Bram Stoker Award-winner, and comic book writer. His Vampire Apocalypse book series, V-Wars, was a Netflix original series. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, John. How you doing? Nice to be here, and thanks for everybody who's watching the LA BookFest. I'm a multi-genre writer. I write science fiction, fantasy, horror. My hometown, and a little bit of everything else. I also edit. I edit Weird Tales magazine. I edited the most recent Harvard Association anthology, Don't Turn Out the Lights. And I write comics and do a little bit of everything else. I'm having fun making stuff up for a living.
Awesome. Welcome. Our next panelist is Andy Davidson, the author of The Boatman's Daughter and In the Valley of the Sun, which was nominated for the 2017 Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a First Novel. Hi, Andy. Good to see you.
Hey, man. Yeah, this is fun. I am very honored to be here with people much more illustrious than I am. So I've been publishing since 2017. I have an MFA from the University of Mississippi. I got that in 2004, and then didn't write anything for about a decade, and decided it's time to do this if you want to do it. So I got back into it, and I have a book, In the Valley of the Sun, yes, that was nominated for Stoker. And that was a lot of fun. And my second book is The Boatman's Daughter, which is out just this past February from MCD MSG. And currently at work on a third book for them as well. So.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Andy. Our third panelist is Lisa Morton, 6-time winner of the Bram Stoker Award, the author of 4 novels and over 150 short stories, and a world-class Halloween expert. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, John. Hey, Jonathan and Andy and everybody out there watching the BookFest. Thanks for coming today. And happy Halloween, almost. I think of the whole month as Halloween month, so that's cool. I'll just talk a little about some things that I have recently had out. Last month in September, my book Weird Women, which is an anthology of classic horror fiction by early female writers, came out. I co-edited that with Leslie Klinger. I'm really very proud of that book in particular. And just last week, my book, Calling the Spirits, A History of Seances, came out. And that is a look at the way that we have called spirits from the earliest days of necromancy to the seances to the modern paranormal investigation. That was a lot of fun to write. And coming next May, I will be a guest of honor at StokerCon in Denver, and we will launch my collection there, Night Terrors and Other Tales.
That's so exciting. Well, welcome, Lisa. It's great to have you here. And I'm going to ask this first question. I'll start with you. What are you doing this year for Halloween? We're in a completely different kind of world to celebrate Halloween. So how has that impacted you and what you're going to be doing versus what you've always done?
Well, I'm sort of going about what I've always done. I do a little tiny yard haunt every year. There's nothing incredibly huge or ambitious about it. Basically, my partner Ricky and I do it to entertain ourselves. This year doesn't change that a bit. We just went out and spent way too much money on a 6.5-foot tall animatronic grave digger for our graveyard. We are already putting a lot of it up, and we just love putting it up. We are redesigning it slightly so that people will be able to enjoy it in a drive-by situation this year. No coming up to the door, I'm afraid, but we'll have candy out for the few kids and nice and socially distanced where they can get it themselves, and we're going to have fun. To me it's a holiday that you just cannot put aside, so it'll be good for us.
Awesome. Andy, how about you? How's Halloween looking for you this year?
Well, my wife and I are generally really boring at Halloween. Like, Halloween is that one night of the year where we kind of turn off the lights and stay home. So this year it's going to work out perfectly for us. But no, I mean, I feel you what you're saying about the Gravedigger, because there was a moment a couple of years ago when we were in Home Depot, and I think they had a 6-foot-tall animatronic werewolf that I tried desperately to convince myself would fit somewhere in my house and would not be ravaged within 1 week by one of our 6 or 7 cats, depending on how many we had at the time. So that number changes a lot. So yeah, I mean, probably not much actually here in our small town in Georgia. Probably pretty quiet Halloween.
Okay. Jonathan, how about you?
I'm kind of in the middle between those two. I usually am at a convention around Halloween's. Like last year I was at Spooky Empire and so on. I generally like to be somewhere around people, but this year social isolation and a plague kind of has me at home. Huh. And, we're also living in a new place than we did last year, so we don't yet know what the trick-or-treater model is, especially during this time of year. So I might stand on the balcony and throw stuff at kids, I mean, candy. But most likely, because I will be at home in isolation this year, I'm probably going to have a watch-along. I have a couple of movies that I tend to marathon when I can around Halloween. Dog Soldiers, the original Haunting of Hill House, and usually one other thing that I throw in around the same time. And, maybe have people, watch it at the same time and talk about it and see what happens. But that's most likely what I'm doing this year. And as you can see behind me, I have my Halloween decorations, my pumpkin and my pumpkin lights. That's a sad little shrine to Halloween.
I love it. I love it. So growing up, everybody went out trick-or-treating, right? What was your favorite costume when you were growing up? And do you have a story? Or what was your least favorite costume? And what's the story with that? And this one's up for grabs. Whoever wants to go first, raise your hand.
Oh, I like to embarrass myself, so I'll start first. So I had this plan of making the world's most perfect mummy costume. Wrap myself in bandages, spent hours, me and my girlfriend, dripping all of this paste on me and painting it and so on. And I waited for it to dry, and it took about 3 steps, and all of it fell off. So I'm in a set of clean bandages again. And I went out basically looking like a burn victim rather than the mummy, because
oh my God,
I couldn't get the mold and stuff to stay on me. So I kept having to tell people I was the mummy. And since the bandages look nice and clean, they're like, well, we feel bad for you. No matter why, but we feel bad for you. Have an extra candy bar. So that was my favorite costume. I did one where I was a zombie, and I was on my porch at a house in Philly at the time. So on my porch, sprawled in a chair with a basket with a bowl of candy, looking dead. And kids would come up on the porch, and I would start moving and so on. Scared the hell out of some kids. They ran away. Any kid who was brave enough to stay got an extra piece of candy. The other ones fled in terror, and I feel good about both.
That's awesome.
Of course, I get asked this question a lot as the Halloween expert.
Okay.
And I've probably told this story a million times, but when I was a kid, when I was about 7, there was a show that was on at the time called It's About Time, which was a sitcom about these astronauts who had gone back in time and were marooned with cave people. And I wanted to be one of the cave people. And my dad was a hunter. And so even at 7, I was obsessed with authenticity. And so I actually had a cave woman costume that was an actual honest to God deer hide, which I wore to school. My mom made me little deer hide booties to go with it and everything. The only thing that it drove me nuts that I could not be authentic on was a wooden club, because I was too little to be able to actually carry a gigantic wooden club. So I had to endure a rank plastic club to go with my costume. But that was my favorite.
Wow. Do you have a least favorite costume, or one that was a disaster?
Well,
or
I have like a terrible Halloween party story when I was in my 20s that I'm not even going to go into. But
okay.
Yeah, there was a disastrous Halloween for sure.
I'll ask you that over drinks at StokerCon.
Yeah.
Andy, how about you? What's one of your favorite Halloween costumes?
Well, it's probably the same answer for both. Favorite and worst. When I was 10 years old, the year was 1989. So in October of '89, I wanted to be Jack Nicholson's Joker from Batman. And I had, like, the pieces were pulled together from just sort of hand-me-downs, like checkered pants that were not really purple and bright colors. They were just sort of gray and blue, really drab. And I don't remember how I got the vest, but I did manage to swing a vest. My mom dyed a white Stafford dress shirt orange. So we pulled all the pieces together. The hard part to fit, to make happen, was the coat. Because when I was 10, I couldn't, they didn't make coats on the rack that you could just go easily grab where I was. And plus it had to be purple. So I feel like we got one of my grandfather's coats that was being thrown away, and dye wouldn't work for the coat. So Mom and I bought purple acrylic paint from Walmart and hand painted this man's dress coat purple. And the result was walking around in a very stiff coat that crunched when you moved and did not last for much longer than a night. But so probably I was at my happiest as a kid because we pulled it off and I had the face paint and everything. But also that was probably the worst Halloween costume ever.
That's pretty great.
That's cool. I'm keeping with Halloween. I'm really curious what everybody's favorite Halloween books are. If you have a couple of favorite Halloweens or one that you just love that always kind of feels like Halloween to you. And this is wide open. If you have one or if you have a couple you want to talk about, that'd be great. I know I have mine, but anybody who wants to grab it, go for it.
Well, when I was a kid, I had gotten to know and be mentored by Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson around the same time. I was 12, 13. And Bradbury was just either finishing or just had published, I forget which, The Halloween Tree. And he was reading parts of it to me, before I actually read the book. And I've always loved that book. And Bronson Pinchot, who was, a terrific actor, he does audiobooks mostly now, did an incredible version of the Halloween Tree on audio, which I now listen to every Halloween. But my other Halloween read is another Bradbury book, Something Wicked This Way Comes. And Bradbury gave me a copy of that for Christmas in 1973, first edition of it. And I buy a new copy of that and read it every Halloween. It's one of those books that is a perfect Halloween read. I don't care what age you are. It's a fantastic book.
That's mine as well. I actually just happened to have it on my desk here that I finished it this morning. So yeah, I read it once a year, usually around this time when October hits. So it's amazing.
Cool.
And I will share this one, which is the first actual history of Halloween that was written. It's actually really good. It was written in 1919 by a librarian named Ruth Edna Kelly. It's much better than some of the later Halloween histories that came out up until the 90s when Leslie Pratt Bannatyne started writing about the holiday. There wasn't much. For about 80 years, the Ruth Kelly book was the standard. And it's still a really fun book to leaf through and see what was going on with Halloween in 1919.
That's amazing. That's definitely some really good books. What about movies and music? Any movies and music that you always want to queue up?
Oh, yeah. For movies, definitely. I mean, The Haunting of Hill House, to me, is one of the most perfect horror films, because the original book is just amazing, too. But I tend to like the blend of science fiction horror. So I'll watch both versions of The Thing. I'll watch Dog Soldiers, because it's my favorite werewolf film. I'll watch either the Franklin Gellard or Jack Palance or Louis Jourdan versions of Dracula. So I do a movie marathon all day long for Halloween. I like the vampires and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I take the day off, and I love just movie marathoning those films, and usually asking for suggestions from people. One I don't watch every year is Halloween by John Carpenter. I like the movie, but it's not an every year one for me.
Well, in our house, we just sort of do the run up, like try to get in one a day, and it's every year it's a little different. So maybe it's things we've seen before, maybe it's stuff we haven't. Like this year, I mean, we're both film nerds here, and so this year, like the Criterion Channel is doing their 70s horror cinema, and so they got 28 films, which is about perfect. And we've been trying to tackle one of those a day. And I think the last one that we watched was Season of the Witch, George Romero, which was amazing. And we also watched Tom Savini's remake of Night of the Living Dead, which is pretty amazing too. So that's what we do. I mean, we're just Silver Bullet. We watched that just a few days ago. Yeah, and Dog Soldiers is on the list too. I've got that Shout Factory DVD ordered. So yeah.
Silver Bullet's an underappreciated werewolf film.
Mm-hmm. I think it ages well. I think it's kind of hung in there in the age of Stranger Things. I think it's a very good film. I think it's the werewolves sound interesting. We'll say the werewolf design is interesting, I think, in light of other werewolves. But yeah, good movie.
Yeah. On a side note, I've always loved the Bernie Wrightson Cycle of the Werewolf novel. It's just was so formative for me. I've read that 1,000 times.
Yeah. It's great. And Jonathan, I love that you mentioned the Louis Jourdan Dracula, which doesn't get nearly enough ink as far as I'm concerned. That thing is awesome. There's a movie I often watch at Halloween, which is kind of unknown and underappreciated. That's a documentary called Hell House, not to be confused with a more recent film of that name. And it's about a Christian group building their haunted attraction for Halloween. And it is screamingly funny. It's well worth seeing. I'm not sure if it's streaming anywhere right now or not. I own the DVD. I throw that thing on, try to every October. I mean, it's like a typical scene in this is where the young church kids are being told to go in and paint a pentagram on the wall of part of the haunted house, and they paint a Star of David instead, and they have no idea what they've done.
That's great.
Definitely one to look out for. I mean, that sounds brilliant.
Yeah.
I must look at.
I'm really curious. I know a lot of other folks watching this too are going to want to know about writing and how has it been writing during the current time? I mean, what is scary today? How's that going for everybody?
Well, I've never had a busier year than I have this year, honestly. And I'm a busy guy, but this year is insane. First off, people in isolation read. They watch TV and they read. So, entertainment's doing okay in some areas. But as far as making stuff scary, people are always going to be scared of something. I mean, COVID is scary, and there will be many books written about it, but there are a lot of things that are scary in this world. And people like to be scared, and they like scares in fiction because fiction has a better third act than the real world does. There's a little more chance to have closure in fiction. And it's funny, the only thing that I had out that didn't do as well was I wrote a graphic novel about a designer bioweapon, and it was called Pandemica. I wrote it a year and a half ago, and it started being published this year as 5 issues. The 5th issue got delayed for months because of the pandemic, not because anybody was afraid of the story, but because the comic book distributors closed down. So for months and months, the people who were hooked on the comic didn't know how it was going to end. And it wound up being the graphic novel of it. The trade collection came out before the 5th issue did, because that's distributed in a different way. Weird. But I'm actually 2 days away from finishing my 3rd novel. Horror is cooking along crazy. People like to be scared, even, or maybe especially because of now.
I will say that it's been a tough year for me creatively, because I tend to, and I think a lot of writers have had this problem lately, is given the amount of time between what we write and when it actually gets published, I find myself tying myself in knots doing this whole kind of, wait a minute, are people going to be wearing masks when this story comes out? Should I put it in the story? Should I not put it in the story? Where are we going to be a year from now? How much should they talk about this? If I put this pandemic in this story, will it be passé in a year? Will it look quaint to readers? All of that has kind of had me looking much more at nonfiction this year. I'm kind of focused on that because I truthfully just don't even know what to do with fiction at the moment.
I had a lot of anxiety early on in this process. I had just finished the book tour for The Boatman's Daughter in March, and I actually had to cancel one event in New Orleans, or actually I did the event in New Orleans and I had to cancel an event in Texas because when I was in New Orleans, I got sick. Now, this was long before there was testing set up for COVID-19. It felt like allergies, but my wife was there with me. We went straight home just in case. I don't think it was, but that was kind of a nerve jangling sort of thing. But I was lucky that I got the book tour pretty much done. But after that, I found a lot of problems with trying to kind of write and work on the new book once we had settled into the quarantine. And, a lot of your attention, we teach, my wife and I both teach at the same university. So we spend a lot of our time here at the house just figuring out how to move everything online and get through the summer and everything. But when I finally did turn to writing the next book, I found in my research about some historical stuff that takes place in Georgia in the early 1900s in the turpentine harvesting industry, which is part of the book, that the 1918 pandemic actually affected that industry to a certain extent. And you can find photographs of turpentine workers and woodsmen who were wearing masks at the time. And so suddenly there was this sort of relevant echo from the past in my writing that felt, it was like a way to write about the pandemic without writing about the pandemic. And because that was what I struggled with too. Like you were saying, Lisa, like, do I put masks on people if I'm like in the future, what are my books going to look like? Because what's our future going to look like, right? So that was one of my big hurdles to get over. And I think just by looking backward, I think I helped, help myself. But and I was on a podcast, Ladies of the Fright, with Victor Laval earlier in the year, and for the Summer Scares program. And one of the things he said, and he was quoting somebody else, was that you can't consider the ramifications of falling off a horse while you're falling off a horse. And I kind of found that to be really comforting too, as a writer, that I don't have to figure out what my writing is supposed to be like until it hits the ground, basically, and we're off the horse. So.
Yeah, just one little point to that. With the fiction I'm writing now, everything that's set more or less in the now, like novels that you don't necessarily set in a specific year, but it's set in the now. It's referencing COVID in one way or another. Whether some people are still continuing to wear masks, just like they do in Japan and so on, where it's mostly from pollution, but a lot of people wear masks, and a lot of them when they moved over here continue to wear masks here because it's become a habit. I think we'll see that happening, and it's filtering into the books as well. Which, if you're writing, say, a spy thriller, makes it easier for the character to go incognito with the mask on. So, I mean, it becomes a plot device that you can use like anything else. Just like in the post 9/11 era, everything referenced 9/11.
Yeah, and that was my next question. Where did everybody think we were going to go from here? And I think you're already answering it, and that's some really fascinating insights. Lisa, what do you think the future holds for horror and fiction in general?
I think the horror genre is really in a golden age right now. I mean, as you mentioned the other day in a podcast I listened to, John, the Barnes and Nobles have finally gotten horror sections back. That's just, yeah, I mean, to me, that's weirdly huge. And I have never heard of so many film companies buying up options on horror properties. That just seems gigantic right now, and has affected many of us who sat around for like 20 years thinking, oh, gee, it would be fun if I got a film option. And then suddenly this year, bam, bam, bam kind of stuff. It just seems like it's really huge. And much of it, I think, is fueled by this incredible amount of great horror that's on television right now. It's all of the different cable channels have really opened up that market, and now we're moving even into the shorter forms with Quibi and so forth. I mean, it's a really exciting time for the genre, I think.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, we've been told for so long that ebooks were going to come in and that literature was dying and all this stuff, and it seems to me that it's stronger than ever. Yeah. What do you think makes books so impervious to the tides of change?
Books are personal. An ebook feels like you're sharing it online. Even though it's a file that you're reading, it feels like it's a website. So it feels like it's not you and the book and the author. Whereas if you're carrying around a book, it's very personal. You're reading, in a sense, the diary of someone else. You know, their thoughts as they created the story. And you develop, you know, I know when I read a print book, I feel like I'm developing not only a relationship with the characters, but a relationship with the author that I don't feel as much when I'm reading an ebook. Oddly, I do feel it more when I'm listening to an audiobook, though I tend to relate more to the audio reader and the characters rather than the writer and the characters. But with a book becomes a friend, you know, and I don't, that's never going away. The only thing that I've seen that's changed recently is I just found out today that Macmillan, one of the biggest publishers, one of the big fives, is no longer doing print arcs for their books, advanced reading copies. They're going totally digital. I just found that out today. Whereas Simon & Schuster is still doing print because this is an arc for my next young adult. So that's probably going to change. We're probably going to see the end of the print advanced reading copy, but print itself, that's definitely here to stay, and it's still dominating the market.
That seems like a response, like to fiscal. That's like a fiscal decision, maybe.
Yeah.
The arts decision. Yeah.
They're expensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
As somebody who's used. Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Oh no, I was just going to add to that the idea of it being a friend, just the tactile nature of a book. That's part of that personal experience. Is the paper, the smell, just the way it feels. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. My day job is a used bookseller, and I can't tell you how many people walk into our store and the first thing they do is take a huge sniff. So yes, it is. The book is all about that tactile experience, and the book can also be an object of art. I occasionally will buy a book just because I think it's beautiful, and obviously other people do, and that's something you'll never get with an ebook.
Right. Like Cycle the Werewolf's a great example of that.
Right.
I mean, that would not have the power in ebook that it had sitting there turning, the page on King's prose to Bernie Wrightson's art. I mean, that was an experience.
I actually, the book that for Boatman's daughter that FSG designed has a cover that almost feels like snakeskin. That's something they did to the cover, which is just really cool. But I bring that up because I've noticed in my sales that the paperback sells much better than the ebook. And the ebook is not terribly priced. I mean, it's a pretty modest price. But people who are buying books just want a book in their hand. And I think this is a good example of that. Just the nature of created cannot be replicated in an ebook.
Yeah, and I mean, the latest book that we did with the Horror Writers Association, the Don't Turn Out the Lights, every story is illustrated. And, that's, again, an experience because the illustrations become a surprise when you turn the page. And it feels like a more personal surprise when you're looking at holding the physical book.
Definitely, and I think that also kind of explains like why people are still going for vinyl in such big ways, and even Barnes and Noble is now carrying vinyl, because I think it just, people are starving for that, like you said, the tactile experience with their art and these creations, which is awesome. And I'm seeing it a lot with kids too. Like when I go to my son's school, they love books. I remember a few years ago, they all had iPads on their desks, and they said, we're going to the library, and they were so excited, they slammed the iPads down, and they went to the library, and everybody came back clutching their books. And I asked one little girl, I said, why are you so excited? And she said, because books are real.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, you're like 6 years old and you get it too. And like, it made me so happy. I'm like, oh, I'm not practicing a dying art after all. It's still going strong. This is great. And
I go to visit schools, by the way. You see flocks of kids walking down the hallway with their favorite book. And if it's a group that likes a book, they're not sharing the book. They're each holding their copy of that book. They're collectors as well as readers. And that's wonderful to see. That's the next generation coming up.
Yeah, for sure. It's really encouraging and heartwarming to see that stuff. It's awesome. Speaking of the next generation in time, we hear a lot about overnight successes, and I think we've all been writing, at a certain level for quite a while. And it cracks me up when you see somebody like they say like Josh Mallerman is an overnight success, and then he takes a picture of him with all his unpublished manuscripts on the ground. He's been doing it for 20 years, But after all this time, we've all gone through the ringer, with publishing and all that over the years. What keeps you going still? What keeps that fire burning to write and keep writing?
Deadlines.
That's so true.
You're not wrong. And that's a true but glib answer, because we all say that and it's true, but also the love of writing. I mean, there are some writers who don't even like to write. They just want to have the book already written so they can then either revise it and sell it or just do book tours. But those of us who are really in the trenches, we love the actual language, what we can do with language, what we can do, like especially with horror, because horror it's a difficult thing to get right. It's words on a page, and yet we're trying to provoke a feeling, a genuine feeling, a connection to it. It takes a lot to do that, and in all the different subtle variations of horror, from the subtlest ghost story to the most extreme splatterpunk, you've got all these iterations, and each has its own interior language within the English language, and that's a beautiful thing to be able to play in that and discover how endlessly elastic words are. So I think for a lot of us, I know for me, for sure, the actual process of sitting and writing and discovering how I'm going to say what I'm going to say, how much of it is gut, how much of it is the craft, how much of it is the moment I'm in, at that time. It's so beautiful. And how can you not want to do that again every day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I think those are both like great answers, because when you hit a bad patch, or like, Jonathan, you're so prolific. I don't know if you have bad patches. I'm sure you do, but I think, everyone does. And so when you hit a bad patch, it's the deadline that keeps you moving. It's that sense of, well, I'm doing this for a reason outside of myself, so I better get it done. Because if it were up to me, I'd take 2 weeks off and I'd be perfectly happy not thinking about this for a short amount of time. But to Jonathan's answer, I can't go without it for months. I can't go without it for weeks even sometimes. And so I think I never liked to talk to people before I became a writer. And once I became a writer, I just found that it wasn't because I didn't want to talk to people. I just didn't have anything I wanted to talk about. And suddenly, this is fun. So I like writing. can't stop talking about it. So.
And I'll put in a plug for, I actually approach fiction and nonfiction very differently. With nonfiction, I love that treasure hunt. aspect of it, that sort of deep dive where you uncover an amazing fact and then you make a connection between that amazing fact and one you made 2 weeks ago, and then that leads you to the next amazing fact. And it's just like this amazing scavenger hunt where you start to see these things connect. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and by the way, when you're enthused about a subject, when a writer's enthused about a subject, it shows through when they're writing, and that's one of the reasons I love, your Halloween books, your ghost books, and so on, because there's a genuine love of your subject matter that shines through. People think nonfiction is dry. No, it's not. It's dry. Right. It's badly written. If it's alive if it's well written, and you bring that. So yay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. My next question may be kind of speculative and a little bit out there, but I'm just curious, what do you want people to take away from your work? I know that's a big...
I'll let someone else go first.
Or if people have misinterpreted your work, why do you think they've done that? And what would you have preferred them to feel about it?
I think for me, it depends on which work it is. I want people to take away different things from different works. I will say I've had some amusing misinterpretations applied to some of my work, especially the first movie I did was an extremely absurdist comedy called Meet the Hollowheads. And I have had people come up to me excitedly after screenings of that movie and give me the most insane theories of what's it about. And you just kind of nod and say, I think that is awesome that you got that out of there. It doesn't matter what I meant to put into it at that point. What they took away with it is just absolutely amazing. When you can have that happen with a work of art, where people come away with these interpretations of it that are things that never occurred to you, I always think that is just absolutely astonishing. I mean, I love it when that happens. But with something, I occasionally love to write stuff that I think is downright political. And that's a pet peeve of mine, is that people say, oh, no, you should never put anything political in your fiction. It'll just make it pedantic. And I think, sure, if you're a bad writer, it will. If you write it well, it will be really powerful, and it might upset somebody. It might change somebody's mind. To me, that's a really wonderful expression. So,
cool. Andy?
Well, I've had people, especially I think with my second book, I've had some slight misreadings and intentionality at times. And as a writer, you always feel like, well, did I not say that well enough, or did I not provide enough context for the reader to understand what I was trying to do or say there? And it's usually not me, I think. I think the wisdom that I've sort of applied to this is that I think people bring to a book their own ideologies, their own political points of view. And I think if you go in a certain direction a little too far, you risk alienating readers. And I hate that. I hate that when that happens. But at the same time, you don't want to be the kind of writer that feels beholden to pleasing everyone. And so that's kind of a hard target to hit. But I think what I want people to come away with when they read something that I wrote is simply what I always felt when I was a kid reading books, whether it was something really mainstream like Watchers by Dean Koontz, or, as I got older, it was something a little bit more esoteric or challenging, is that they were entertained, that they were engaged, and they felt something along the way, and it took them somewhere emotionally. I think that's always my goal, is to make the reader feel something, especially empathy, which I think we lack that quite a bit these days.
Oh, yeah. For me, people ask me why I write about monsters, and my answer is always the same. I don't write about monsters. I write about people who fight monsters. And that's an important thing. In my adult fiction, particularly, it's about someone who is encountering something beyond their control, and somebody who's doing something bad, and they go up against it, whether it's supernatural or not. They go up against it because they must. They're either forced into it or choose to do it, but they're fighting against this thing. And I know a lot of writing is cathartic. When I was a kid, I was in an abusive household as a kid, and in a rough neighborhood as a kid, very poor. So there were monsters for me to fight. And I studied martial arts and got tough and got educated and got out. So that was how I got my power to beat my monsters. And I like exploring different ways in which characters who are up against this find their power and find their knowledge and find their way out or find their way to victory. With kids, it's slightly different. I mean, there's that element too, but I was encouraged to read and to read beyond my comfort zone. So I love writing, like if I write a book in the Rotten Ruins series, which was my most popular YA series, there's going to be the adventure, there's going to be the entertainment, and I love entertaining. I love being entertained. But also there's the fighting monsters element to it, but there's also the encouragement to think beyond what you know. And I like stories that make a kid want to think and want to know more. And I've been very fortunate in that those books have been have received a number of statewide awards as books that make reluctant readers, especially boys, read. And I never expected that to be the case, but now that I know that those books resonate that way, it makes me eager to write another one and another one, because I want to get as many boys, and boys and girls, but boys are more reluctant to read. I want to get them as excited about reading as I was as a kid, and to fall in love with it as I did.
All right. Well, I love those answers. Oh, Andy, you have something to add?
No, I'm just musing. I was just saying that's great.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm going to wrap it up with kind of what we're hoping is a fun and creative question. Okay, so you wake up one morning, you're heading out, you open the door, you're heading to your car, and you see zombies. And you're sure it's zombies because they eat your neighbor. And then they eat your neighbor's little girl. So what is the first thing you're going to do at that point?
Yeah. How about you go first, Lisa?
Make sure I know where my cats are, because who knows what those zombies are going to eat. I don't know. Do they eat cats as well as people? I know that's terrible to say, considering that they've just eaten my human neighbors, that I'm more worried about my cats, but there you go. And then, I will probably hole up and create some makeshift weapons and see how long I can last in what I've got in the house before I've got to get in the car and kick some ass.
Andy?
I'm not going to go into a cellar if I have a cellar. That's the one thing I can definitively say. And should the window of a door in the kitchen be knocked out, I will not wait a strangely long amount of time to cover that window with board.
Yeah. I have spent way too much of my life thinking about this question. When I was 10 years old, I snuck into the movie theater to see the world premiere of Night of the Dead. So I have been with the zombies from the jump, October 2nd, 1968. So I've given it some real thought. If they're fast zombies, given my current age and the fact that I'm not as fast on my feet as I used to be, I'm lunch. If they're slow zombies, I've been thinking about that since '68, so I'm good. I will also not, go into a small confined space, bang loudly enough to attract every zombie in the area by hammering, or lock myself in a basement where you can't flee, because we've seen how that works out. So honestly, I'd grab as many people as I can in my car and go to the closest Costco or food distribution warehouse and hole up for months, because food, generators, truck bays, comfort, I'm in. TVs with DVD players and it running off a generator, we'll be fine.
Do you let other people in?
Oh, yeah. You need more people to survive. A handful of people is a mighty thin gene pool. I want a lot of people to survive so we can start over again.
Wow, I love it. These are amazing answers, and I took notes because the way we're going, who knows, right? Well, I think that concludes our panel. I'm so grateful for everybody's insight and point of view, and just amazing hearing all this, and it was a lot of fun too. I think we had some good moments here. So I'm really grateful for everybody's time, and thanks to the LA Book Fest for having us, and happy Halloween, everybody. Thanks.
Happy Halloween. Thanks, guys.
Happy Halloween, everyone.